The Golden Age always appears wrapped in luxury, flowing silk gowns and faces elevated to the standard of perfection. Yet behind those flawless, immaculate visages lay hygiene habits so appalling they could make all of Hollywood hold its breath. What would you think if you knew that the greatest leading man of the silver screen neglected himself to the point of weighing nearly 130 kilograms, carrying a horrifying stench blending alcohol, cigarette smoke, and moldy cheese, or that one of America's most seductive sex bombs was so reluctant to bathe that she would go to sleep with a full face of makeup, all in the name of preserving her natural scent? There was even a superstar who stubbornly refused to wear underwear for decades as a personal, unshakable preference. So, who were these names? Hit the subscribe button now so you don't miss the next fascinating secrets. And the first on the list is none other than the legendary blonde bombshell, Marilyn Monroe, a suffocating symbol of sensuality buried beneath fossilized makeup and an obsession with the scent of the night before. Marilyn Monroe always appeared radiant, flawless, and dazzling beyond measure in front of the camera, becoming the dream of millions of men around the world. Her iconic quote, "I only wear Chanel No. 5 to bed," became legendary. But few people knew that behind the bedroom door of America's sex symbol was a chaotic and shockingly unhygienic reality. According to Alan Whitey Snyder, Marilyn's longtime and most trusted makeup artist, she almost habitually refused to remove her makeup or wash her face. Psychological pressure, insomnia, and constant exhaustion often caused her to collapse straight into bed. Marilyn would sleep with her full foundation, powder, bright red lipstick, and of course, layers upon layers of Chanel No. 5 still on. The result was that every morning, Snyder had to painstakingly wipe away the hardened, flaking layers of old makeup, cracked like plaster on her face, before he could apply a fresh one. Not only was she reluctant to wash her face, Marilyn was also extremely reluctant to bathe. Instead of soaking in a tub to cleanse herself properly, she preferred to wipe herself down casually with a damp cloth, then spray on perfume, blindly believing this would preserve her natural feminine scent. Most notably, Marilyn had an incredibly strange habit. She forbade her housekeepers from washing her silk bedsheets for days at a time. She believed that the scent of the night before, a mixture of stale sweat and makeup lingering in the pillows and mattress, was what created her irresistible allure. Her bedroom was always cluttered with clothes thrown everywhere, the floor coated in a fine white layer of powder like dust, and the air thick with a heavy, pungent odor. When photographer Bert Stern shot the final legendary series The Last Sitting, 1962, with Marilyn at the Bel Air Hotel, he was overwhelmed. The air in the room was so suffocating that he had to throw all the windows open just to dispel the overpowering scent of excessive perfume. Those who worked closely with her all admitted that Marilyn had a very distinctive, personal scent, a mixture of expensive perfume, body lotion, and the sour smell of an unclean body. While this oddly human scent made many men fall for her even more because it felt so feminine, for colleagues forced to work with her in enclosed filming spaces, it was truly an olfactory nightmare. From a beauty who used expensive perfume to mask her body odor, Hollywood soon witnessed another hygiene disaster, this time from a refined king. The difference was that what made people nauseous around him was not the smell of sweat, but the stench emanating from his mouth. Marlon Brando, a screen legend drowning in excess fat, alcohol, and the stench of moldy cheese. Marlon Brando was a cinematic legend, but his undisciplined lifestyle was a nightmare for anyone who worked with him. At his Beverly Hills mansion, Brando had a habit of devouring food right on the sofa. He didn't care about crumbs and grease falling all over himself, sticking to his clothes and drying there. The actor was extremely reluctant to bathe, leaving his body constantly emitting a thick odor, a mix of sour sweat, cigarette smoke, whiskey, and moldy cheese. A former assistant once revealed in frustration, Brando would only change into a new outfit when the stains of food and alcohol had become too obvious to hide. This carelessness worsened as he aged and reached nearly 130 kilograms. His room was always a disaster. Half-eaten pizza boxes reeking of rot, liquor bottles scattered everywhere, and cigarette ash covering the carpet. His lack of hygiene directly affected his work. On the set of Apocalypse Now, 1979, he locked himself in a tent for days without bathing or changing clothes. The stench became so overwhelming that director Francis Ford Coppola and the crew had to use activated charcoal to deodorize all the surrounding props. Brando often justified his sloppiness with method acting, believing that keeping his real smell helped him live as the character. His colleagues, however, strongly disagreed. During the filming of Last Tango in Paris, actress Maria Schneider had to request a break because she became dizzy and nauseous from standing too close to him. Even Frank Sinatra later publicly refused to work with Brando again, bluntly stating that he could not stand that garbage-like smell. Brando died in 2004, leaving behind an invaluable artistic legacy, but also a chilling legend of a man whose presence could make an entire film set hold its breath. If Marlon Brando's filth stemmed from indulgence and lack of discipline, then in another corner of America's elite society, there was a man who lived in filth for a completely different reason, a psychological disorder that consumed him entirely. Howard Hughes, the great billionaire who became a recluse living among trash and jars of urine. Howard Hughes once had everything: a handsome billionaire, a powerful director, and a shining aviation tycoon of America. But in his final years, he lived more miserably than a homeless man. It all began with a catastrophic plane crash in 1946, which left Hughes severely injured and triggered an extreme case of obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD, centered around germs. From the mid-1960s onward, Hughes completely isolated himself in a room at the Desert Inn Hotel in Las Vegas. He sealed all the windows with black tape to block out light and toxic air, and forbade anyone from touching him. The most tragic contradiction of Hughes was this: he forced his staff to wash their hands dozens of times, until they bled before handing him anything. Yet he himself refused to bathe for months, believing water was contaminated with bacteria. He even used empty tissue boxes under his feet as makeshift shoes to avoid touching the dirty floor. Inside the darkened room, Hughes sat naked, watching the same film repeatedly, his emaciated body reeking. His hair was matted into clumps, his beard grew down to his chest, and his fingernails and toenails curled like claws because he refused to cut them, fearing the tools were not sterile. The room was filled with the smell of dampness, dirty paper, and worst of all, hundreds of glass jars filled with his own stored urine. The white fabric chair he sat on had turned gray-black, coated with a thick layer of sweat and grime. Hughes sustained himself on canned soup and milk, consumed through a straw sealed with tape. When he died in 1976 during an emergency flight, his body weighed barely over 40 kilograms. It was so deformed and foul-smelling that forensic doctors had to wear gas masks, and the FBI had to rely on fingerprints to confirm his identity. The hotel floor where he had stayed was sealed off and completely stripped, carpets and curtains removed, because the stench of decay and accumulated waste had seeped too deeply to be cleaned. He died from a kind of decay created by his own fear. Elizabeth Taylor, legendary violet eyes and a religion of masking body odor with perfume. Elizabeth Taylor was the embodiment of luxury, glamour, and breathtaking beauty with her legendary violet eyes. Yet behind the diamonds and flowing silk gowns, her personal hygiene philosophy stood in stark contrast to that elegance. She deeply disliked soap and rarely bathed properly with water, holding a firm belief that bathing would wash away her allure and femininity. Instead of cleansing her body, each morning Taylor chose to change her scent. She turned herself into a walking perfume laboratory, drenching her neck in Chanel, spraying Dior into her hair, applying expensive Caron lotion across her shoulders, and dabbing concentrated jasmine oil behind her ears. Her clothes became so heavily saturated with fragrance that housekeepers had to wash them separately. At night, she absolutely refused to bathe. The accumulated sweat, remnants of makeup, skincare products, and layers of perfume blended together, fermenting into a cloyingly sweet, overpowering scent that could make one dizzy. During the filming of the blockbuster Cleopatra, 1963, Taylor's use of fragrance reached its peak. She emptied dozens of bottles of heavy perfume, turning the set into a suffocating chamber of scent. The director had no choice but to run powerful ventilation fans all day to prevent the crew from fainting. Despite doctors' warning that the perfumes were causing severe respiratory allergies, Taylor treated them as an impenetrable shield to conceal fatigue and aging. Even before going to sleep, she would spray several more layers just to sleep luxuriously. In 2011, when she passed away, the entire funeral room was thick with her signature blend of jasmine and musk. Visitors whispered to each other that they could smell Elizabeth before they even saw the coffin. She lived fully and departed within a cloud of luxurious fragrance, perfectly masking a body that had almost rejected soap for decades. And if Elizabeth Taylor overwhelmed people with excessive femininity, then Hollywood's King of Cool brought a completely different kind of intensity, a scent of raw masculinity soaked in dust, grit, and filth. Steve McQueen, a rugged king of cool or a grease-stained mechanic reeking of gasoline? Steve McQueen represented one of the most rugged, masculine, and rebellious images on screen. However, this grittiness wasn't just a style, it literally clung to his skin. McQueen hated bathing. He often just wiped himself briefly and then poured cheap Old Spice cologne all over his neck to mask the smell. He had an intense passion for speed. Every morning, after roaring through hours of motorcycle racing in his garage, McQueen would emerge wearing a leather jacket soaked in sour sweat, his skin grimy and coated with grease and gasoline. Those who worked with him often whispered that standing next to him for just a few minutes felt suffocating, like being trapped inside an old repair shop on a scorching summer afternoon. During the filming of the classic Bullitt, 1968, crew members had to constantly spray deodorizer and leave the doors of his Ford Mustang wide open every day, because the smell of his sweat, cigarette smoke, and engine oil had seeped so deeply into the car's interior that it wouldn't dissipate. This sloppiness followed him home to Malibu. His living room was always filled with thick cigarette smoke, the smell of old leather, and lingering gasoline fumes. At the peak of his eccentricity, he even casually wheeled a leaking motorcycle straight into his bedroom. Bedsheets, curtains, and carpets were stained with black oil streaks splattered across the walls. The house staff were so terrified of the overwhelming odor that they only dared to sneak in and clean when he was away. McQueen lived like a machine that never shut down. He could drive all night, fall asleep on the sofa, wake up the next morning, change only his shirt, and head straight to the set. Even when diagnosed with terminal lung cancer and advised by doctors to avoid smoke and dust entirely, he ignored them, continuing to smoke, drink heavily, and reject soap. When McQueen died in 1980, friends recalled that his body still carried faint traces of gasoline, tobacco, and leather. He lived exactly as he portrayed himself, a speed legend forever inseparable from the smell of engines. In stark contrast to McQueen's filth or Howard Hughes's fear of water, Hollywood also produced a star obsessed with cleanliness to such an extreme that life itself became a sterile isolation chamber. Joan Crawford, the star who disinfected the entire world, and an obsession with cleanliness taken to pathological extremes. While other stars made people uneasy because of poor hygiene, Joan Crawford created suffocating tension in the opposite way, through an extreme, almost pathological obsession with cleanliness. Once one of the most powerful actresses, Crawford carried an intense fear of germs and dirt, rooted in her impoverished childhood, spent in damp, slum-like homes in Texas. Her luxurious Brentwood mansion lacked the warmth of a home. It was cold and saturated with the smell of medical alcohol, resembling a hospital operating room. Bed sheets had to be replaced every night, door handles wiped with alcohol every 2 hours, and windows scrubbed 3 times a day. Anyone, even VIP guests, had to remove their shoes before entering. Even her unfortunate pet dogs were frequently scrubbed with disinfectant-soaked cloths. This obsession, obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD, turned Crawford into a tyrannical employer. She plastered detailed cleaning schedules across the walls and punished staff mercilessly. If she spotted even a single speck of dust on a table edge, the entire household staff would be forced to stay up all night to deep clean the entire house. Her adopted daughter, Christina, revealed that Crawford would often wake her in the middle of the night, forcing her to kneel and scrub grout lines in the bathroom until her hands bled. On set, this behavior never diminished. Crawford demanded that her personal chair be constantly disinfected with alcohol before she sat down. No one dared to sit on it, even after she left. On some days, under psychological pressure, she would rush into the bathroom and scrub herself up to 6 times, simply because she felt something crawling on her skin. Joan Crawford spent her entire life waging war against dirt, turning sterility into a harsh religion, only to pass away in a space completely devoid of human warmth. In contrast to Crawford's sterile, chemical-laden cleanliness, Hollywood also had a refined gentleman who chose an entirely natural cleansing method, just as eccentric and obsessive. Cary Grant, the elegant gentleman who rejected soap and the mystery of a mansion filled with lemon scent. Cary Grant is remembered as the epitome of sophistication, the ultimate standard of a gentleman in Hollywood's golden era. Yet the man who regularly wore exquisitely tailored suits had an incredibly unusual hygiene habit. For over 40 years, he absolutely never allowed soap to touch his body. Grant firmly believed that the chemicals in soap would damage the skin's natural oils, while lemon juice would purify the body and maintain clean energy. Each morning, instead of bathing, he squeezed fresh lemons, soaked a cloth in the cold juice, and rubbed it all over his body. Afterward, he drenched himself in cologne. His bathroom constantly reeked of sharp citrus acid. Piles of lemon peels filled the trash, and the floor was stained from acid corrosion. He didn't use shampoo either, only combing his hair with a light alcohol-based oil. This eccentricity was not entirely private. From the early 1940s, Grant lived with actor Randolph Scott in a seaside mansion in Santa Monica, nicknamed Bachelor Hall by the press. Coincidentally, Scott also rejected soap and shared Grant's passion for lemon bathing. Every morning, the two would sunbathe outside, causing the entire property to be filled with a strong citrus scent mixed with cologne. Neighbors joked that they didn't even need to see the actors to know they were home. Just smelling the breeze through the windows was enough. This habit stayed with Grant until his final days. When he passed away in 1986, a silver cup used for squeezing lemons each morning still sat on his dressing table, a sacred object he never allowed anyone to touch. In a Hollywood filled with the smells of alcohol and cigarette smoke, Cary Grant was the only one who carried a citrus acid fragrance layered with cologne, elegant, yet unforgettable in its intensity. If Cary Grant was obsessed with purifying the body, then the queen of the screen, Bette Davis, took a completely opposite path, turning her own body into a toxic dumping ground through addiction. Gable, the king of Hollywood, with a charming smile and breath that smelled like rotting meat. Gable was once hailed as the king of Hollywood, the ultimate symbol of masculinity that every woman of the 1930s dreamed of falling into. Yet any actress who ever had to kiss him on screen swore never to repeat the experience. The tragedy began in 1933, when Gable developed acute necrotizing gingivitis. The disease devastated his mouth, causing him to lose most of his natural teeth and forcing him to wear dentures fixed in place with dental cement. Instead of maintaining them properly, he refused to remove them for cleaning, fearing it would affect his handsome appearance. The result? Food particles became trapped, decomposed over time, and produced a horrific stench. The most famous incident occurred during the filming of Gone with the Wind. Actress Vivien Leigh had to ask the director to stop filming because the smell from Gable's mouth made her so nauseous she couldn't continue. Earlier, actress Loretta Young had also fled the set of Call of the Wild for the same reason. To salvage the situation, MGM had to scatter mints, roasted coffee beans, and throat sprays around the set to mask the odor. Ironically, in every other aspect, Gable was impeccably groomed. He bathed every morning, shaved clean, and wore perfectly tailored suits. Yet he had a strange fear. He never soaked in a bathtub because he didn't want to sit in his own dirty water. When Gable died in 1960, the press praised him as the most charming legend of all time, while his female co-stars quietly breathed a sigh of relief, finally free from the torture of that desperate minty cover over something far worse. Bette Davis, the queen of the screen who turned herself into a living ashtray. Bette Davis was an acting icon with piercing eyes and extraordinary talent, but she was also one of the heaviest smokers and drinkers in Hollywood history. Starting to smoke at just 16, by the mid-1950s, Davis was burning through more than 100 cigarettes a day, while continuously drinking whiskey to deliberately maintain her signature raspy voice. This abuse of stimulants caused her body to emit a horrific odor. The buildup of nicotine, fermented alcohol, and sweat soaked deep into her skin, clinging to every strand of hair and every piece of clothing to the point that the wardrobe department had no way to clean them. Her makeup room was always thick with cigarette smoke, like a fire had just broken out. White curtains turned yellow from the fumes, wigs and costumes carried a burnt, acrid smell. During the filming of the masterpiece All About Eve, the director had to repeatedly shout, "Cut!" and pause shooting because the smoke she produced was so dense it made her co-star's eyes sting. Constant smoking turned her fingernails yellow, her lips darkened, and her skin became dry and rough like sandpaper due to severe dehydration. Her home environment was just as suffocating. In her memoir, her adopted daughter B.D. Hyman recalled with horror that everything in the house, from curtains and bed sheets to blankets and pillows, reeked of nauseating nicotine. Davis ate very little, sustaining herself almost entirely on alcohol and smoke. Even after her lungs were severely damaged and doctors warned her, she continued smoking until her frail fingers could no longer hold a cigarette. When she died in 1989, the cleanup crew had to spend weeks airing out her apartment and using strong chemicals just to remove the deeply embedded smell of smoke from the walls. Her addiction made her entire body reek, but sometimes neglecting just one small part of the body is enough to shatter a perfect image. That is exactly the tragicomic story of Gary Cooper. Gary Cooper, the elegant heartthrob who made co-stars nauseous by refusing to brush his teeth. Gary Cooper embodied the image of the quintessential American hero, tall, with deep blue eyes and a gentle smile that captivated millions. Unfortunately, that very smile concealed a secret that made anyone standing close to him hold their breath. Cooper held an extremely unscientific belief. He thought the bristles of a toothbrush would damage enamel and cause teeth to fall out prematurely. As a result, he never brushed his teeth. To clean his mouth, the actor merely rinsed casually with water, occasionally chewing roasted coffee beans or sucking on mints. The inevitable consequence of rejecting the toothbrush was severe periodontal disease, yellowing teeth, and breath that carried a horrifying odor, a mixture of long decayed food and cigarette smoke. The horror known as Gary Cooper's breath was very real in Hollywood. During the filming of Desire, 1936, the legendary Marlene Dietrich could not endure it and had to ask for multiple breaks because she felt nauseous whenever he came too close. To salvage romantic scenes, crew members always kept trays of mints, roasted coffee beans, and throat spray right beside his chair. Even when dentists bluntly warned him he would lose all his teeth if he didn't maintain hygiene, Cooper stubbornly ignored them. The irony was almost comical. Outside of this, he dressed impeccably. He favored tailored suits from Savile Row in London, kept his hair neatly styled, yet allowed his mouth to become a landfill. Despite his foul breath, the charm in his eyes remained irresistible. Ingrid Bergman once admitted she had to deliberately turn her face away while speaking to him to avoid the smell, yet still found herself captivated by his gentleness. If Gary Cooper only made people uneasy when he opened his mouth, then with Errol Flynn, his very presence could suffocate an entire set from several meters away. Errol Flynn, Robin Hood. Reeking of sour sweat and expensive rum, Errol Flynn was once the embodiment of masculine charm, famous for his heroic action roles, especially as Robin Hood. Like Flynn even became a popular American phrase for effortless success with women. But in real life, this notorious bad boy lived in a filthy, unhygienic way that was hard to believe. After long nights of indulgent parties, Flynn rarely bothered to step into the shower. He would simply splash cold water on his face to wake up, douse his sweat-soaked neck with expensive perfume, and head straight to the set. He drank alcohol like water, especially strong Jamaican rum. The massive intake of alcohol caused his skin to constantly exude a slick layer of sweat, carrying a sour smell of fermented alcohol mixed with perfume and cigarette smoke. Female co-stars often begged directors to film close contact scenes quickly so they could escape and breathe fresh air. Standing near him for just a few minutes was enough to make them dizzy. His sloppiness was evident in wrinkled, sweat-soaked shirts, messy hair, and chairs that retained his stubborn odor. His home was a chaotic mess. Unwashed clothes scattered everywhere, beds stained with spilled alcohol, and sticky floors. In his later years, Flynn effectively destroyed his own career when he moved to live in a damp house in Jamaica. His living space was filled with empty bottles, his body constantly foul-smelling and disheveled. Neighbors recalled that the scent of Robin Hood was so strong they could smell it from outside the gate. When Flynn died in 1959 at just 50, the coroner was shocked to note that his liver and body had deteriorated like those of a 70-year-old alcoholic. Tallulah Bankhead, the actress who rejected underwear and a dressing room nicknamed The Swamp. If Errol Flynn suffocated people with sour sweat, then stage and film star Tallulah Bankhead elevated filth to another level. Reckless, unapologetic indulgence. With her distinctive husky voice and commanding presence, Bankhead had shockingly poor hygiene habits. She could go an entire week without bathing, relying only on cheap perfume sprayed excessively to mask body odor. At elite social gatherings, her scent was always a chaotic mixture of cigarette smoke, cheap gin, and unwashed skin, forcing nearby guests to discreetly open windows for fresh air. But the most shocking thing about Bankhead was not just her reluctance to bathe. It was her insistence on never wearing underwear for decades. She considered going completely without it a form of bodily freedom, completely unconcerned with others' discomfort. The most famous anecdote occurred on the set of Lifeboat, 1944, directed by Alfred Hitchcock. Because she wore no undergarments during a scene climbing into a lifeboat, crew members complained in embarrassment. Hitchcock famously quipped, "I don't know whether this problem belongs to the costume department or the makeup department." Her reluctance to wash clothes meant she often wore the same dress repeatedly, stained with old makeup, cigarette ash, and spilled alcohol. Her personal dressing area was so messy and foul-smelling that crew members jokingly called it Tallulah's Swamp. Her home was no better. Cigarette ash covered the floors, moldy drink glasses piled up, and house staff frequently quit because they couldn't endure the suffocating environment. Yet despite living in such a mixture of overwhelming odors, Bankhead still radiated a strange allure, a deadly charm woven from pride and total indulgence. Leaving behind Bankhead's swamp, the film world would soon witness another man just as overwhelming in scent. But his odor did not come from laziness. It seeped out from pores soaked in alcohol itself. Spencer Tracy, the veteran actor whose pores seemed to seep. Whiskey. With 9 Oscar nominations throughout his career, Spencer Tracy was one of the greatest actors in history. But behind those brilliant performances, he was essentially a walking barrel of liquor. Tracy spent his entire life immersed in alcohol and cigarettes. He treated bourbon like drinking water, smoked relentlessly day after day, and rarely bothered to bathe properly. The massive amount of alcohol in his system made his sweat carry such a strong scent of liquor that one could almost taste the bitterness. His hair was always greasy, his face slick with oil, and his clothes were so deeply soaked with the smell of alcohol that the wardrobe department eventually gave up trying to clean them. When he walked onto a film set, no one needed to look. Just the wave of whiskey-saturated air was enough to announce his arrival. During the filming of Bad Day at Black Rock, 1955, his body odor made the atmosphere on set feel thick and heavy. The director had to urgently deploy large industrial fans, blasting them directly toward his acting area just to disperse the smell. Tracy's costumes had to be replaced weekly because the old ones had developed such a sour, irreparable odor. At home, his apartment resembled a rundown bar after closing time. His desk was littered with empty whiskey bottles, dirty glasses, and overflowing ashtrays. Tracy would clean himself only by wiping down quickly with a damp towel, never truly stepping under a shower. Layers of sweat, alcohol, and cigarette smoke clung to his skin, giving him the constant appearance of someone who had just crawled out of a heavy drunken stupor. Yet his talent was undeniable. Actress Katharine Hepburn, his partner for 26 years, once described him with both sorrow and fear, saying that Tracy carried the smell of alcohol and the smell of sadness. When he died in 1967, that unmistakable scent of whiskey still lingered in his room. A final trace of a life that was glorious on screen, yet disheveled in reality. Hollywood has always been a place where dazzling glamour hides the rawest truths. If these behind-the-scenes stories have shocked you and shattered your illusions, don't forget to leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Which of these 13 legends do you think has the most shocking and haunting story? Hit like to support the channel. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next videos uncovering the hidden secrets of the film industry. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.